Hello, Stephen. How are you this morning?
Oh, I thought that was just the soundtrack for a movie I was about to watch.
That
Well,
was very entertaining. I saw you kind of beating your
how
invisible drum in the background. It was good.
are you, Michelle? Glad to be back on my Feuertips show, I hope.
Yeah, I'm always glad to be here with you, Stephen. Thank you for allowing me to be here with you.
So, folks, as you'd expect, Michelle and I get on beforehand and we get ready for the show and make sure we're going to do a stellar job. And the only topic that I had that wasn't really nailed down was what's the small talk we're going to talk about at the beginning, make a little small talk, then move on. And I have a confession to make. I'm terrible at small talk. So we're going to use this as our small talk conversation. So how are you with small talk, Michelle? Are you good with that?
Generally no. So I got a little bit flustered before we went live, thinking, what are we going to small talk about? So I'm glad you filled our small talk space.
We
Are
did
you
it. All right.
tip?
Moving on to PL SQL. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. So my name is Stephen Feuerstein. I don't usually do that. But anyway, my name is Stephen Feuerstein. I'm the person who pretty much knows only PL SQL. I was talking to a good friend of mine from years past, Patrick Burrell, who's still active in the Oracle database community. And I was just once again marveling at how amazingly lucky I am that since 1992, I've literally done nothing but PL SQL and learned almost nothing but PL SQL. And there's definitely downsides to that. I'm not encouraging anybody else to do it, but boy, did I get lucky. So I'd like to share my luck with you today. And we'll talk about named notation. So a really cool feature in PL SQL in some of the languages, though not all languages support it, that allow you to make your invocations of procedures and functions a lot more readable. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you what name notation is very briefly. And we'll get into the details. But what I'd like you, and I'm sure a lot of you already know about what name notation is. So here's what I want you to think about. And because I'm going to ask this question, what can you do with name notation that you can't do with positional notation? What are the things that it makes possible? Okay, share my screen as they think about that, and we look at some code.
Yeah, you haven't shared your screen, Stephen.
I understand. You can't do this for me.
That I can do. I can put it on the screen once you share it.
There
you go. Now I've shared your screen.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I've got this procedure. First of all, a schema level procedure, create or replace procedure. In general, you should not do these. You should put all your procedures and functions inside packages. Okay, but I've got my standalone procedure, calculate annual carbon footprint, because we need to be more aware of how we're consuming fossil fuel energy so that we can hopefully stop the planet from warming up to the point of burning us all up, which apparently is not going well so far. So I've got lots of parameters, and I'm sure the real calculation would have many, many more parameters. But how many miles have I driven in a year? What's the type of car I drive? What's my type of diet? How many miles have I flown? And then coming out, the description, I guess, of the footprint calculation and how much CO2 I used. Now, I can't really do this. So there's my code, not much to it. But here's my procedure. And here's the positional notation way of doing it. And it's pretty much certainly what I learned when I first learned PL SQL, and maybe what a lot of you do as well, and just by default fall into. So with positional notation, we have formal parameters. Those are called the formal parameters. This is called the actual argument or actual value. So with positional notation, the actual argument is associated with its parameter, formal parameter, by position. This is the first parameter. This is the first argument. This is the third parameter. This is the third argument. So that's positional notation. Here's name notation. It comes with the equal greater than symbol, one of our composite symbols in PL SQL. We don't have a whole lot of them. And now what I'm saying, I'm literally explicitly associating the formal with the actual, one after the other. And hopefully you can see in an instant that the main driver behind using name notation is that it makes your code much more readable and easier to maintain. So if anybody comes back to this procedure a year from now, 5 years from now, whatever, if they look at this code, they think to themselves, well, I have no idea what this is about. Well, I sort of know what that is, probably something to do with diet. Not sure about that. So I have to go back to the definition of the program and look at the parameter list and then say, oh, that's what it's about. But with name notation, no. Right there, it tells me what these values are for, making my code more readable and easier to maintain, and also offering lots of interesting advantages. So now I want to ask my folks if we have anybody who has identified what you can do with name notation that you can't do with positional. And now why don't you stop sharing my screen?
Yep.
The affinity effect. Let's take a look.
Kevin's I put Kevin's comment up on the screen.
Great. So one thing you can do with name notation is you can change the order in which you specify the values, the arguments, the actual argument values, because of course the position is not required. So I can move them in any order I want. Okay. What else? Nils. It especially allows you to skip parameters which have default values. Yes, this has got to be, I think, the number one thing in my head anyway that is absolutely not possible to do with positional notation. And we'll get into it, but it has to do with default parameters, with internal in parameters. Okay, and anybody else? So let's go ahead and look at Nils's point and Kevin's. And if you think of some others, just add them in there and Michelle will bring them to my attention. So let's share the screen again. We're getting good at this, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's also on LiveSQL a script. Just search for name notation on LiveSQL, and you'll see the exact code that I'm about to show you. But now I've got my own free ATP tier instance. Thank you, Insum. So I'm just doing it all here in SQL Dev.
About time, Stephen.
Yeah, it looks like it didn't freeze up. Good. It looks like it's on the cloud databases. You're constantly getting reconnected or need to reconnect. Okay, so here's my demo procedure. Here's an in parameter, in out parameter, in parameter, out, and in parameter. A messy order of things. Now, first of all, here's a question for everybody. What are the minimum number of actual values that have to be passed into a call to name notation demo? The minimum number of elements in the list of expressions. We've got 3, 4, 5 parameters. So you could say the answer is 5 or 4 or 3 or 2 or 1. No other answers are allowed because you're rational people. So think about that one. What's the minimum number of parameters of actuals that you have to pass? But now let's take a look at different ways to call this while you're thinking about that one and continue thinking about other things that you can do. So we've got Nils and Elias have said 3. The minimum number is 3. Okay, so let's see. Here's how you figure out the minimum number that you have to provide. If it's an in parameter without a default value, you have to provide an expression or a variable. If it's an in out or an out, you have to provide a target for the value coming back. So that's always going to be some sort of variable. If you have an in parameter with a default value, you should not have to provide a value for it. So the minimum is 1, 2, 3. Good job, folks.
Yeah, what a smart bunch of cookies.
Smart bunch. Okay, so let's take a look at all the different ways that you can call this name notation demo procedure. First of all, positional notation. I have no idea what you're talking about, but it compiles. Congratulations, programmer. Also, with positional notation, this is the minimum number of actual values, 4, not 3, that I can pass in. And that's because I can leave off with positional notation. I can leave off any trailing in parameters. In other words, there are no outs or in-outs after that in. That does not, and it has a default. That means I can leave this one off and it will automatically pick up the default value for that parameter. So that's what's going on here. Then, of course, I can switch to name notation. And now I'm going to keep things in the original order, though that's not all of them, is it? No, that's not all of them. Let's fix my script. We've got this one too. Oh, that's not right. Okay, let's see. Internal trailing in, right? That's what I need, trailing in. Sorry. So trailing in.
You're missing a comma, Stephen, after the one about
pure programming. This is great. Pair programming. Peer review. Okay, so now I've got all 5 parameters in the original order. So that's essentially using the advantage of name notation around readability. Now, the other thing I can do with name notation that I cannot do with positional is I can skip any in parameter that has a default. With positional notation, I cannot call name notation demo and use the default value for internal in with default because I have to have something after it for my out variable. But when I use positional name notation, then I can provide just those 3 values, skip over internal in parameters with defaults. So again, that's one of the specific things that you can do that you cannot do in any way whatsoever with positional notation. I can change the order to whatever I want. And also I can blend positional and named. So I can start with positional and I can switch over to named. But once you switch to named, you can't go back to positional because you lost the position. So those are some of the techniques that are possible with name notation. Now, why would some of these things be useful? So in terms of changing order, well, it'd be nice if everybody wrote code like us, right? Because we write the best code in the world with the best thought through naming conventions and ways to approach things. But sometimes other people aren't as good as us. So for example, I like to always have my out parameters at the end. So this is not how I would write this. I would write something more like this. And this goes up here. So to me, it's like you do all your ins, then you do your outs and your in-outs at the end. Obviously, whoever wrote this procedure didn't have that same idea. And that means that when I call it with positional notation, I have to follow their order. But since I can move them around with name, then I can say all my outs and in-outs go to the bottom, all my ins at the top. So that's one advantage that I find with changing the order. In terms of mixing notation, the way I've seen this come up the most is when I'm using or I'm working on an existing piece of code. It's been around for years. Whoever wrote originally, me, didn't use name notation. Now I've added some new parameters. And usually when I add those new parameters, I'll always use the name notation because I can and I should. All right. So those are some more thoughts on name notation. Do we have any comments that I should look at?
So Jamal earlier I guess you wanted me to stop sharing your screen. Says name notation makes test scripts much easier to read and
good
reuse.
And reuse in the future. I like that too, because one of the things you get with name notation is that flexibility. If I add additional in parameters with trailing values with default values, my existing calls with name notation do not need to change. You're much more likely to have to change positional invocations as code changes over time.
Then Kevin.
In my opinion, we should stick with name notation. If I am Oracle and can travel back in time, I would not even support positional methods, only name notation. Oh, Kevin. Okay, well, yeah, I think that it's true that it would be great to always do it. It's one of those best practices that wars against your impatience to write code. So obviously it takes more time to write those subprograms, to write those invocations, if you have to do grab the names and so on. I meant to do this before I started the session, but I believe there's a way in SQL Dev and most IDEs to actually generate a call with name notation. But what I'll often do is simply, I'll have the package spec in one tab. I'll grab the actual call to the definition of the procedure, drop it into my code, and then I use block editing and change all my ins and in-outs to equal, greater than, and then put in the values. So I don't have to type each of the parameter names over and over again.
So only because I think this is very funny, Rachel was very impressed that I found that missing comma. So thanks for that, Rachel.
And Rachel also says, can you put up, I have my roots in object-oriented programming, so I do overload functions. Yep. I always feel what I think is irrationally insecure about exception handling with overloaded functions, even name notation. I always feel insecure about exception handling with overloaded functions. Honestly, Rachel, I'm not sure what the issue is that you're raising. So overloading is great. It's something you can do in object types, even in PL SQL, method overloading, and subprograms and packages. I should probably do a tip on overloading. This time I'm writing it down so I don't forget. I say this in every session. I have to go back and watch my video to find out what I said last week, and I hate to watch videos.
I do feel like you're always writing it down somewhere, though. I see you, or maybe you're just pretending to write.
I just scribble in the air.
What about the comment from Elias? If you're using name notation, then it becomes complicated if you rename your parameters.
Right. So just back to Rachel. So
sorry.
No, it's okay. Leave that up there. That's okay. Feel free to clarify, Rachel, what your insecurity is about with overloading and exception handling. It's not clear to me that it's about name notation, but I'm definitely going to do a future tip on overloading, and we'll explore some of the best ways to overload. That's right. Definitely stop worrying and overload. Overloading is a fantastic feature, one of my favorites. Okay, Elias, the only problem is it's a bit complicated when you rename a parameter name. No question. So if you rename a parameter name, then you will have to go find every place where that parameter name was actually included in name notation and change it. So you could say that's a downside. I think that's a really great upside of using name notation. Here's why. When you're building a package spec, you've got procedures and functions, et cetera, et cetera. Your package specification is telling everybody what they can do with this code inside the package body. And the best way to think about a package API or any API is it's a contract that you are signing with your users. And as soon as you publish that package spec and people use it, you've made an agreement. You're accountable to them. They're not accountable to you. You provided code to them, and you should not go willy-nilly changing that API in a way that breaks their code. So to me, if you really feel the need to change parameter names, you should create an overloading, and then you can use different parameter names. Now, one interesting thing there that we'll talk about in overloading is that if you create an overloading and the only difference is the parameter name, then positional notation invocations will fail because it doesn't know which one you mean. You haven't provided the parameter name. And in general, overloading in which the only difference is a parameter name is not a great idea. But again, to me, if you've published your spec, if your spec is in use, you should not feel free to say, you know what? I'm going to change that parameter name because now I don't have to restrict it to 30 characters. It can be 50 characters and be very readable. It might be a good idea, but you shouldn't do it because it will cause this ripple effect and it will violate your contract. Other thoughts from our listeners?
Other thing, Sheesh says it's just a matter of time for Feuertips to become niche scripts. I got this. Still back to finding that lonely comma. I'm very.
We're gonna have a spin-off soon.
I'm telling you.
Show me your code and I will find the problems with it. And that's worth gold right there. Okay, so let's see. Other thoughts on name notation? Any other questions? Let me see. I'm going to zip over to my list of items. I think I've covered all the specifics around named and positional. Okay. So in general, in terms of when to use it, you should definitely use all of it. Yes, Rachel, we're going to do the contest. We're going to do it really soon. In other words, we're going to have somebody pick from our organizations. I'll get to that in a sec. So in general, the best practice is always use name notation. In reality, you may not always do it because you don't feel you have the time to do it. Try to find ways in your IDEs to make it faster to do, make it more productive. But also at a minimum, when you're calling programs that are rarely used, it's really, and especially built-in functions and functions and procedures that have lots of arguments, that's where you really want to take the time to use name notation. dbmsalpha.putline, for example, or substring. First of all, with built-in functions, things from Oracle, you can use name notation there as well. We never see it, but you could. But those are things, if you're talking about dbmsalpha.putline, you don't have to use name notation for that. Everybody knows what that procedure is and what you're passing to it. But if you're using a subprogram that people almost never use, that has 8 parameters, then you're really causing a problem down the line for them if you don't take the time to use name notation. Okay, so that's almost 20 minutes. That's a good amount of time. So let's go on to the final phases of our tip this week. And Rachel, I see your point about overloading. Don't worry about being fearful of overloading. We'll cover that probably next week, and everybody will come out of it feeling really great about it. Okay, so for the final phases of my weekly tip, I have a book I'd like to recommend and 3 organizations that somebody will pick from. Michelle, have you picked the person who will pick the organization?
I'm looking through the comments, and I think many have already picked in the past. Elias, if you're still around, we would love for you to pick from one of the 3 organizations that Stephen's about to share to receive a $25 donation from Insum this week.
So please share my screen.
Share your screen.
So here are the 3 organizations for this week. One is the Trust for Public Land. First of all, in general, I really love this concept, which is we should use our money, either public money or private money like this one, and even better, the money that has been grabbed by billionaires around the world, take that money and buy land and set it aside so it can never be developed. So that's what the Trust for Public Land does.
Nice.
Second, Earth Justice. It's another organization that focuses around, as we say, we go to court for the future of our planet, where the planet needs a really good lawyer. So they use the legal system to do what they can to protect and heal our planet, just like Center for Biological Diversity, which we talked about several weeks ago. So Earth Justice, because the Earth needs a good lawyer. I love that tagline. And finally, Surfrider. They've been around for a long time, obviously linked to, and I think started by surfers, and they work on clean water and healthy beaches around the world. So setting aside public lands from development, giving the Earth a really good lawyer, and helping clean up our beaches and make sure that we and everybody else on this planet besides humans have clean water as well.
Nice.
Okay. Has the answer?
So Elias, if you're still around, if you want to put that in, and anybody else, in the meantime, if you have any thoughts on who we should donate to, yeah, Elias, clean water.
So $25 to the Surfrider Foundation. And to finish up for this week, my favorite book to offer to you is called Your Inner Fish, A Journey into the 3.5 billion year history of the human body, by a guy named Neil Shubin, who was, I think, the director of the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, or maybe the Natural Museum. Anyway, don't remember. Really great writer, very entertaining. It's a small book, and it will just blow your mind about what we now understand about how. That's not me.
I'm so sorry.
As long as it wasn't me. Well, that's selfish of me, but anyway. So this book is a really quick read, and it will explain things like why we have hiccups and where hiccups come from and how they actually evolved from a common ancestor with sharks and many, many things like that. And especially if you've ever, I don't know how many of you have heard of the concept of intelligent design. It's basically fancy words for God created stuff the way it is today as opposed to evolved over billions of years. And not to get into any big controversy about this stuff, but one of the things you realize when reading Your Inner Fish is that if intelligent design is true, if God designed us to be the way we are today, then wow, God had an amazing sense of humor. In part, we are designed to look like we evolved over time because we're full of mistakes and full of odd little developments that stopped and started. Anyway, really great stuff. Again, if you have not recently studied evolution by natural selection, and what that means and how it works in our world and what we know about it, then you're really lucky, because you can just go read a few books and go out in the world and have your mind totally blown open by how life works in this world today. And Your Inner Fish is a great start. And in fact, if you have kids, this is important knowledge for you to have and pass on to them, because we should know our bodies and how our bodies work, right? And kids should know that for sure. And if you don't factor in evolution into that understanding, you just can't understand it anymore. Okay.
I think I'm being trolled.
Yeah. Satan designed Canadian geese. I like that one.
Yeah.
Geese are repulsive creatures. If you ever go near a goose that has goslings near it,
I did that last weekend. It was terrifying. Geese
are impressive creatures, and like many creatures, they love their kids. And they will do anything to protect them. So yes, thanks for that, Rachel.
Hey guys, if you're watching and you enjoy what Steven's doing here, comment, like, subscribe. We'd really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I've got one comment from Judith. Just so I was sad to hear that you decided not to travel anymore. Never, ever. So I did announce on Twitter last week or a week or two before that I have decided I am no longer traveling at all for business. I will not be traveling to any more conferences ever. It's not because I don't enjoy seeing all of you. I have enjoyed that greatly. It's enriched my life. But given the climate emergency, given the fact that flying is an incredible contributor to us killing our planet, I just can't do it anymore. So I'll travel for family when I really have to, like my mom's turning 90 next year. I'll probably fly down to Florida for a big party. But other than that, no way, staying home. But you can come to see me at the ECO conference in November, because that's in Raleigh, North Carolina, nice and local. And I encourage all of you to avoid any kind of flying unless you absolutely really need to. Thank you. Okay, Did we have any other comments we should go over?
Just more goose comments.
I did have a comment from Jamal. I use name notation in all test scripts. I pass null when the parameter is empty. The 3 IDs I know of generates the skeleton for it, yes, which is very helpful. And I'm sorry I wasn't ready to show you an example of that in SQL Dev. I just forgot to get around to it. You don't want to see me looking for the right things to click. So good stuff. Okay, great. So hopefully you knew about name notation already. If not, great new advances in your understanding of PL SQL, and hopefully you're just more encouraged to do more of it in the future. So thanks for joining us, and thank you, Michelle, for doing such an amazing job of helping me
catching that lone columnar. Yeah.
And we'll see you next week. And happy safe coding. When you're going out, please stay masked. Get vaccinated. The Delta variant is causing havoc around the world. We really should be able to put this virus to rest now. We have the vaccinations to do it. So please get it done and encourage your friends and family to do the same. All right. See you next week. Thank you, everybody.